going to play John Company. A few people have indicated some interest in this, and I played it very recently opposed. So I thought I'd give it a shot solo, and of course I'm going to play the more complicated version solo than I played opposed, which is fine. This is a game about the East India Company, essentially. However, it may not play out the way the East India Company historically did. It's got a lot of what-if baked into it. Component-wise, you have a little board. Here represents the different offices within the company. These are senior officers, executives, including the chairman. And this is handled largely by following this little track as to the order of actions, the little ribbon going around the table runner, I guess, I don't know. And then you've also got potentials for additional offices to form out here. The goal of the game is going to be to do nice things for your family, which makes sense. It has some similarities in this way to Infamous Traffic, also by the same designer, Cole Laurel. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, or close enough. He's got some interesting design ideas. This game is the one that triggered me on the obfuscation in gaming, because I felt a significant amount of obfuscation in here as to managing to get what you want done. You have to do some kind of weird manipulation of the game state that doesn't seem directly to be, oh yeah, I'm doing this with my family, but whatever. What else do you have? You have monies, which I got over here. These are 1s, 3s, and 10s. And these are busted markers, not in play, basically. And you got one here to indicate that China does not start the game in play. You've got shipbuilding capability, which you pay some money in order to get yourself ships. If nobody's got any shipbuilding, the ships are going to cost you 6 each. Otherwise, one shipbuilding drops it down to 5. And if both shipbuilding boxes are filled, it goes down to 4. With some profits made by the people who own the shipyards. Let's see what else we got here. We got this balance of India, which indicates whether India is generally orderly or generally chaotic, and that'll shift around a lot. It's a 3-valued variable, and there's a modifier based on that. You have your goods factories, which are kind of like the shipyards. They're going to cost you 3 each for goods, or the company 3 each for goods in general, unless somebody builds the factory, in which case the price is variable and it'll be determined by the last event. This is not correct. Don't worry about that. We'll talk about that card in a moment, because I'm already modifying the game after having played it only once. Basically, and not played with that card, I think. Basically, there's something I think is kind of weird in it. We'll talk about that. You have a voting track, which is going to keep track of, for or against certain laws that might be passed. Let's see. You got a big bad event deck. Got these cards, which are the player cards for the families. These are the major families that are involved in the business, and they have basically a special effect that each family has. And then a little place where if somebody else makes you a promise, and we'll explain how that happens in the mechanism of play, they give you a cube and it goes over in that location. If you don't have that, if you haven't redeemed that promise somehow during play, it's going to be worth -2 victory points to you. Doesn't do anything for the person you gave it to, unless it if it's redeemed, it'll probably help them. And there are a number of ways to redeem it, which we'll talk about later, I guess. This little chart, which is going to show how much of a dividend is paid out based on how much the firm has made, what the dividends are given, how much the firm decides to pay out in dividends. On the other side, we have special rules in case the monopoly fails, which is what this card is, but there's two versions of that card, essentially. You have regional or territorial cards, and at the beginning of the game, 3 of the territories are aligned with particular presidencies. If a presidency ever loses all the cards that it can do business in, it will be busted and it'll get one of the little black things in it. That's one rule that we got kind of wrong, but I can see why. The rule book is kind of difficult to find things in if you're not sure of. Now over here we've got some regions that aren't aligned with a particular presidency in the business. In particular, we got the Mughal Empire here, which includes a couple of territories, and we've got Hyderabad and Mysore. Each of these cards has a number of factors to it. First of all, on the back side of the card is a depressed state, which will make less money and have different random events coming. There'll be commodities that if you trade with them and meet the trade demand, you get a certain amount of money for the company, usually again. And then you've got this, we'll talk about that in a moment. You've got a defense strength for the territory, how much it's worth if it gets plundered, and how much tax you can get from it if you govern it. You also have this event chart. Now the event chart is divided into 2 sections. If it's a neutral territory, if it's its own kingdom and not dominated or ruled over by someone else, you use this line. If it's been ruled over by someone, you use this line over here. And the effects of those events are then spelled out here. Not only do we have, in addition to the big offices, we have some minor we have places where you can put your family's effort into. So you have manors, for example, which will cost you £5 to put into. And they're worth victory points, 2 victory points at the end of the game for each cube that you get in here. We have shipyards, which normally cost £3 to put. You can put as many as you like in, but you have to fill the 6 box before you fill a 5 box below it. Factories, same thing, £3 each to fill the box, lower the price. You'll get some revenue if somebody buys from your lowered price, potentially lowered price factory. Over here are writers. This doesn't cost you anything to place into it, but it also doesn't have a whole lot of value except for one thing. All the offices are taken from the writers. We have officers who are going to be your military men. You can again put a couple of cubes in here each game turn. And the military affairs director will be able to assign them to specific presidencies, to the armies associated with those presidencies. We have captains who are going to be ship captains. Ships don't need captains, but if you have captains, you make income. Income that kind of gets pilfered out of the company income because you're assumed to be doing underhanded trading and stuff like that. It's not like it's illegal or anything. What else do we have? I didn't explain the back side of these cards very well. If the monopoly fails, you flip over these cards. People get the opportunity to flip these cards over, and then they can run their own little private companies in competition with the East India Company. These are governorships for the particular regions, and if a region is conquered, you get them. And there are also residencies. which I don't even know how they occur. Interesting, yeah? Okay. Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. I don't know how residencies occur. And I don't remember seeing them in the rulebook, except being mentioned that they can be there, but yeah. Okay. You have wooden cubes, which indicate people in your family. At the beginning of the game, you're going to have 5 of these, semi-randomly assigned. You may get some additional ones on the board as well. The way they'll be assigned, oh, I forgot one of the boxes. The way they'll be assigned is to the things that you can place pieces into during your player turn. The one place I didn't mention is shares. You're allowed to buy as many shares as you like. You'll be paying the share price for them, and these guys are worth 1 victory point each. Now, the share price is often less than the manor price, and unlike the manor, the shares actually give you something of some value. Notably, they give you votes towards the chairmanship of the company, and they give you dividends. The only way you get dividends is by having shares, which means if the company pays out dividends, you will get some based on those shares. Is there anything in the components I have? And a buttload of dice, and you will probably need them. There's 10 to begin with. You can roll more. All right. Excuse me. Still a little under the weather. And by the way, don't worry if you want Imperium Romanum. More is coming. Worry if you don't want it, because more is coming. I don't know how much more. All right. There's also the prize deck. Now, this is where you get a lot of your victory points. When one of your people in a senior or executive position in the company is retired, which can either be just a nice thing, hey, I'm no longer going to be there, or it can be a bad thing in certain cases, like you could be retired due to a certain level of incompetence. A certain level of it, you're just cashiered in an ugly sort of way. Then you're able to acquire these prizes, and some of them will be available set up at the beginning of play. And the way these work is that they'll indicate the job type that you need to get it, a cost that you need to get it, a victory point value, and then in this case, for example, there's a special ability. During attrition, you can force a reroll of one player's attrition die roll. And when you do that, it goes over to used. It's still worth the 2 victory points, but you don't get to reroll it. Now, you've got a strict limit on the number of cubes that you get to use over the course of the play, which is dependent on the number of players. In this case, you always start with 5 cubes as your base. In this case, there's 12 additional cubes. No, I lied. You always start with 12 additional cubes. The number of starting cubes that you have varies by the number of players. In 5 or 6 players, it's 5, but it can go up to 8. And there are additional cubes to cover the amount in case you're playing a smaller game. If you're playing a 2 or 3 player game, there's sort of a non-player character who's in play to help fill out some of the roles that you wouldn't normally play. They don't play exactly as a normal player, and I'm not going to worry about them too much. There's a number of different scenarios in the game, and you choose one to begin. I'm playing mostly the campaign scenario. There's going to be one, basically the base game, the simplest game, which is what I played before, is a 6-turn game that starts with the same setup, but without the Monopoly revocation. The campaign game is a 10-turn scenario that has that Monopoly revoked in the deck. And the deck is stacked so that it's kind of in the middle part. There's 3 cards, then 3 cards including the Monopoly revocation, and then 4 more cards. However, there are reshuffles in the deck. And what you do in that case, it's not all clear. It seems like there should only be a 10-card deck. I'm using the entire deck with the initial stacking with one variance. Instead of this card, I'm using a different card. This one automatically revokes the monopoly, but I'm leaving it here in order, well, I'll tuck it under here, in order that if there is a reshuffle, it's going to get shuffled into the deck. Instead, what I'm doing is having a revocation based on a vote. Now, that particular card supposedly goes in the mid-game scenario, which I cannot find in the rules. I can find one scenario which uses that card, but it doesn't get shuffled into the deck. Instead, it just gets triggered every time there's a certain kind of failure. I don't want to do that. I want to play around with this a little bit. It shouldn't do too much harm to the game. All right, well, we're going to need to pause to swap batteries, and I could use a break, so I'll get to kind of a more in-depth discussion of the rules, where I use the rule book and everything in a bit. I haven't gone too much into, I haven't gone completely into the setup. For example, I haven't played out the prizes. There's like 5 of these available. They last for the entirety of the game. That's something else I don't feel comfortable with. But I don't know quite what to do about it. Basically, they're a mechanism that allows you a little bit of replayability, but I kind of like the idea that prizes would shift over the course of the game. I'm not going to do that this time, although I might consider that another variant that is kind of exciting. This game's got a very sandboxy feel to it, so I wouldn't worry too much about me making it go off the rails more than it already will. The other thing I haven't done in setup is you initially select offices. So the first player, and we're going to make it this family, gets to select one office of their choice. Now, they probably want chairmanship, but maybe they want one of the other executive positions. Then you rotate around, and then you reverse and snake back, and so on, as many times as necessary to fill all of the senior and executive offices. After that, for each cube you have remaining, you roll a die out of your initial 5, and those cubes get placed in different places. Now, at the beginning of the game, certain cubes cause additional things to happen, and that's specified somewhere or another. Okay. There's a lot of information on the board. So for example, here, after the 3rd turn, if 7 or more regions are closed, right now that's 5, that's the regions that aren't open to trade. The game ends immediately, and you lose 3 victory points for each president, governor, resident, and the chairman. And the people who are currently holding those positions. You could end up bailing from that position before, for example, you could be retired from that position before the game ends, which is one interesting facet. And, maybe you could use this ability at that key point to make sure you get retired and then can go become victory points. One of the things with the game is early in the game you probably want to build up some kind of engine that produces money for yourself, but eventually you want to start getting as many of your cubes onto victory points as you can. When I played it, this wasn't obvious for some reason or another that you really wanted to collect victory points like you do in every game. And I kind of didn't realize that I was at all in the running for winning the game because I had a lot of my cubes in stupid places where they were no longer accessible, whereas other people were making money and doing cool stuff. And it ended up that the 2 people, myself included, who were that I was the least worried about winning the game, actually had the most victory points stocked up. Shit like that happens to me. That is not the obscurantism I'm talking about. That should have been bloody obvious. Okay. So, sequence of play is up here. The first thing you do in a turn is your family phase. At this point, you get to pick to place in one and only one of these boxes. And limited by whatever restrictions are in the box, like only 1 cube per turn, and whatever you have to pay for that box. You can move cubes out of your stock, i.e. the things that aren't on the board, basically, or on victory point markers, into one of these spaces. I'm trying to see about the setup. There should be... Whenever you get an E space, you get an additional starting cube of that color in the court of directors, which means placing in one of them costs you 2 cubes. Board of directors is not necessarily the place you want to be. And I think we did that wrong. I think we took free cubes for that. Let me see these others. If you end up in the officer or captain space initially, and you'll notice there's no die roll space for writer. You can't automatically get thrown into writer as a bone. If you end up in officer or captain, because those are weaker starting spaces than these others, you end up getting a free cube out of your stock, not one of the starting ones, in here. Any random cubes that go into the board of directors will give at the beginning of the game, will give the chairman $4, which he'll get to allocate among these piles that already have money in them. Those are the operating expense locations for the company. Okay. Let's go back to the family phase. So during the family phase, you're allowed to place cubes in these things, and you take the effects as listed. If you are forced to use cubes on the board for some reason, and you must take a family action, which means if you have no cubes left in your pool, you must withdraw cubes. The cubes that are withdrawn have to come from a prize card or the manor, your choice. If you cannot remove any cubes at all, you will not be forced to play. But there are certain cases where you're forced to drop a cube. The Jones family, again, this is something for the 2 and 3 player game, which allows it rolls some extra dice and throws some cubes based on the die roll thing. They'll never end up in writers, which means they never get really promoted into any of the offices. Okay. The next thing that happens is the company phase. Well, the first part of that is you have to fill the vacancies. First, the chairman is allowed to fill all the executive offices, I believe. Okay. If the chairman's not filled, that's the first thing you have to do. And what you do for that is each player has a number of votes equal to the court of directors value, the number of cubes they have in the court of directors. The person who was previously the chairman gets to nominate some other player to be the new chairman, or themselves to be the new chairman. Then starting with the nominee, each player votes their shares as to whether or not they want to be chairman. If somebody wins the majority that way, that's great. They take one of their cubes out of the court of directors, and you can only nominate people who are in the court, and move it to the chairman slot. Now that immediately has cost you something to become the chairman, which may or may not be worthwhile. So you may not want to be chairman, although it's a powerful position. The other possibility is that you don't get, the nominee fails, in which case the next person in seating order from the prior chairman selects another nominee. Has to be someone different. Eventually, every person who's got a cube in here, assuming there's failures all the time, will have been nominated. If nobody succeeds, as soon as somebody succeeds, they become the chairman. If nobody does succeed, however, then what happens is the previous chairman gets to select any one cube out of here to become the new chairman. So it kind of behooves the previous chairman to fail everyone if they possibly can, unless their first nominee is their own best choice for it and they force them into it. Okay. Let's see. So after the chairmanship is filled if needed, then the chairman has to fill the various executive offices. Now, the chairman gets to promote any senior S officers up to the executive officer position. Now, there's an important rule here, which is nepotism. If you promote someone, and these have to actually be done in order. I believe let me make sure. Executive officers who promotes any cube on a senior to the new executive office. I'm actually not sure. I'm not sure that that's the case. I'm not sure that you have to promote them in sequential order. But, and I'll look at that to try to make sure. But the way it's worded, I don't see that actually. If you nominate someone to an office or promote someone to an office, that's fine and good unless it's your own cube. If it's your own cube you're promoting and you're promoting them over the heads of anyone else, you owe a favor to every single person that you just promoted him over. I think given the way this is worded and given the way the chairmanship is, given the way this is worded, and given the way the chairmanship would be kind of a boned position otherwise in this particular respect, I would say he's allowed to nominate, to place these in whatever order he chooses, rather than strictly in the following order. Right? No? First fill the chairmanship, followed by the remaining vacancies in the order of their position. Yeah, so, okay, you got to do Director of Trade first, which means Bengal is the last of the executive offices they fill. Notice that China's only a senior office. Okay, so what that means is this is, I don't have the option necessarily to promote myself into Director of Trade. I probably will choose someone else for that and end up promoting myself to one of the presidencies of my choice. Anyway, if there are not sufficient senior officers to fill the executive positions, you draw from the writer block, the blocks in the writer space. And again, you might be promoting over the head of some of other people. Now, one thing you can notice here is one of the payoffs or promises is owner promotes you over another. So if somebody else has your promise and you promote them over someone else to one of these positions, then you get one of your promises back. Only one. You don't get them all back. Okay. If you run out of writers, there's a problem, and that office doesn't even get filled. The provincial offices, which are these cards, are promoted by the executive in charge of them. So if, for example, there's a governor of Madras, because it's been conquered already, well, then whoever the president of Madras is gets to choose, and he can take any writer or any officer who's assigned to one of the armies. It doesn't have to be the army it's from to be governor, or resident for that matter. The purchasing offices, which are these down here, ships, goods, not military affairs, right? Ships and goods are purchasing. Military affairs is purchasing as well. Those offices are filled by the Director of Trade. Now, I do not know who fills the Superintendent of Trade in China. I would assume the Director of Trade, but we'll see. There's this event card which creates the Superintendent of Trade in China, and I haven't seen it played. Okay. Right. If there's special rules in the 2 and 3 player game because of the Jones family, where more promises are given for nepotism. Okay. Now, anytime during the company phase, the chairman can once grab one of these, drop it in somewhere. I think it's the court of directors. Yeah. Drop it here and borrow $5 immediately, which he then must assign somewhere to these revenue sinks. This will cost $1 in interest every term. It can never be paid off. You're only allowed to take one debt per turn this way. It is possible that you will be forced to take debt for other reasons if you can't meet expenses. Okay. The purchasing office. The 3 purchasing offices, ships, goods, and military affairs, will go next. Okay. Yeah. So then we do, starting with ship purchasing, each office will act. And we work our way around, and I think we go back up here. We follow this red line instead of the blue ribbon that we go for jobs. All right, purchasing ships. You must purchase as many ships as you possibly can. You must purchase the cheapest ships possible, and you just use the cash here. And there really isn't a lot of decision making there, except that you might favor one cheap ship over another cheap ship because you'll like the people who have the cubes there, like let's say it's yourself. You pay the price for the ships, and whoever, and the price is 6, 5, or 4, whoever has a cube on the ship that you paid gets $1 out of that price into their personal treasury. Okay. Purchasing goods works in a similar way. You pay either 3 or the cost, which will start out at 2, for factory owned things. You must buy the cheapest goods first. You must buy as many as you possibly can. Oh, I forgot to mention something. So you give the goods out? Yeah, okay. You give the, you must purchase as many as you possibly can, and anybody who has a cube for the factory gets the entire purchasing price, which is probably £2 or less. Although maybe it's 3. Okay. Then we go to the the military affairs. Military affairs is allowed to buy goods, which he turns into cannons. And they follow the same rule of goods as the goods purchasing guy did. and he must buy as many as he possibly can. Then any officers that he has over here, and here's something screwy. And I'm not sure if this is intended to be the case, but at the beginning of the game, captains and officers don't get to do anything. They have to be refreshed before they get to do anything. I'm going to make sure that's the case, that there's nothing that states that they get refreshed in the initial play or the initial setup. Yeah, I do not see. Let's see. Yeah, I do not see anything about that. So these end up really kind of bones, except you get the Rider cubes in play as well. And there will not be a military at the beginning of the game, which kind of makes sense. But anyway, the military affairs guy, if there are any officers who are over here, not over here, he assigns them to the armies, and if he's bought any cannons, he assigns them to the armies at his discretion. The officers, you can only fill 3 spots with cubes in each army. You can put as many cannons as you like. If an office was not vacant at the beginning of the turn, you can bump the previous owner out, and the cube goes back to the stock. If there's too many officers to fill all remaining armies, well, you can't assign them all, and then you get to choose there. And there's no nepotism in that I see in placing officers. Okay. The Director of Trade is able to first, he offers any captains who are over here, and remember, they won't be there on the first turn of the game, an opportunity to buy a ship. If the captain agrees, their family purchases a ship. He can choose any available ship. The ship is given to the Director of Trade with the captain on top of the ship to indicate that he'll be piloting that ship and will be getting some extra revenue for it. If the captain declines, or if there's no ships available, none left, the captain returns back to the pool. Same thing with officers who are unused. They return back to the pool. Okay. Then the Director of Trade assigns any goods and ships to the presidencies. He can also transfer goods and ships from one presidency to another if the owning president is willing to accept that. And he might use, hey, I'll do it, I'll give you this ship, but move this ship over. Now, one important thing to note is that you can have any number of ships on a presidency. You can have any number of goods, but goods won't be delivered unless there's at least as many ships in that presidency that are going to be used. A captain on a ship, that's now considered a singular piece. You'll have something like this, and it'll get used and generate some revenue and this, that, and the other. And nothing ever changes. That captain doesn't get removed from the ship unless the ship gets removed somehow. With one exception, you can give this ship to someone else and they put their cube on it instead. All right, the presidencies, when we get around to them, they're going to have different actions. Now, their actions are blue, and that means that there's a check required for their action to succeed. Let me explain checks. The way checks work is that an action is going to have a certain strength, largely determined by paying money. And then there's a resistance or a penalty to that strength. That'll indicate how many dice you roll. So if you had a strength of 3 and a resistance of 1, you would roll 2 dice. however many dice you roll, you take the lowest die, and that's going to determine your success. In general, you want a 1 or a 2. That'll be a successful action. A 3 or a 4 is an unsuccessful action. A 5 or a 6 is unsuccessful, and you bungled it so badly that you've been fired and you're removed from office without an opportunity to retire to one of the prize cards. Okay. So the different actions that you can do from the presidencies are let's do them in order. Campaign. Campaign is to make an attack. The campaign action, you count up your military strength, which is going to be the number of officers and cannons that you want to expose to it. You're allowed to attack really only the location listed on your card. So that's here. So this is allowed to attack Bombay, this Madras. That's all it's allowed to attack. Your strength is going to be the number of cannons and officers that you exhaust, and you exhaust them by shifting them down. And I believe you can pay $2 for each mercenary, which is essentially an extra die that you can spend. That $2 comes from here. Oh, look, lots of money. And that'll be your base strength. And you'll be fighting the defense. The defense, for most regions, is simply written on the card. However, an empire gets a sum of the defense of all the regions that it controls. So, let's say we were attacking here with just mercenaries, which is insane, and I spent $4. That would give me 2 dice, minus 1 for the defense. I would get 1 die, and I'd be hoping for a 1 or a 2. Not good odds, probably not worth doing. Okay. If you succeed in the check, you've conquered the region, you dominate the region, and it's open for trade. Now, this is already open for trade, but these over here are not. Now, of course, I can't attack these from Bombay, but I can actually, from the Bombay presidency, but I can actually attack these from other provinces. And I don't remember where that's noted. Probably on the governor card. Okay. So the governor of Punjab can campaign in these regions if he's created. Take the governor of Bombay, since that's what we're talking about. One of the things that happens if I conquer a region is I cover up its independent random events. There will be room for a new officer who the president selects out of the writers, or the officers. Officers of an army, not out of the officer pool. And that would be allowed to attack Punjab, Mysore, or Sindh. Well, they're over here. Punjab and Sindh are both part of that empire. They would require defeating the entire empire's strength. Mysore, fairly strong, but, whatever. Okay. We'll get to that in a moment. The provincial office is created. If the conquest was the sovereign of an empire, all the dominions of the empire become sovereign and closed. So, for example, if I attacked the Mughal Empire, Sindh and Maratha would both be loosed from it, and I would take it. If I attacked just Sindh, I could pull it out from the Mughal Empire and make it smaller. You don't usually see people going after the big, strong things, though. That office will be filled in the next company phase by that president. If the attack's successful, everybody who had an officer cube gets money equal to the plunder value this case $2, of the province that you just took. Okay. After I do any attacks I want and the officers have been exhausted, then I'm allowed to open trade. The open trade functionality works similarly. I determine the strength of the action. Every pound that I spend will give me a point of strength. There is no penalty at all for this action, although there are consequences to it that are not necessarily positive. I choose a target that's closed and sovereign. So I could take the Mughal Empire this way. I make a check. And if I'm successful, the target becomes open and it moves into my presidency. The final action is the sale action, which also requires a check. I can attempt to fill orders on my regions. Orders are these things. In order to do one of these, I need to send a number of ships or goods, well, a number of ships plus goods that equals the value on here. The strength of the action is 1 die per pound allocated. The penalty is 1 less than the number of regions in the presidency, which is why you don't want the Mughal Empire as a whole in your presidency, because it means you've got a 3 penalty in addition, you know. If the check's successful, you can fill orders. You exhaust a number of goods and or ships equal to the order's demand. Orders can be filled in any order, but there can never be more goods than ships exhausted in a presidency. After the order's filled, you put a black disc on the order's demand and increase the company revenue by the amount it indicated. So for example here, let's say I filled just this for 2, with say a ship and a good. I would increase this by 5, and I would put a black disc here. If I did both of them, I would increase it by 9 and put a black disc on both. Now, there's a bonus to fulfilling orders, and in addition, there are good effects to increasing the company revenue. This is considered a semi-co-op game, but there's always a victor possible. So even if you destroy the company, it may be in your best interest to destroy the company. It's not like Republic of Rome where you're really worried about, you know, can the company survive or not, right? Okay. The provincial officers. There are 2 types of provincial officers, governors and residences. These are created when a region is conquered. I think they're both created, and I think that's something we did wrong. Let's see. Maybe I'm missing something. No. Okay. So you either get a governor or you get a residency. The governors are allowed to campaign and invest. Campaigning works just the same way as the president campaigning does. You can only use unexhausted troops, though, plus mercenaries. So if some governor before you campaigned already, and they're done sequentially in terms of the order in which they've been conquered, then you might not be able to do that. Invest is a little different. That's an attempt to improve the economic stability of the region. The residents are just like governors, except they can't conquer anything. And we've got 4 of these. Bombay, Bengal, Punjab over here, and Madras are the 4 that can conquer. And the others only have a residency. Okay. Conquest works exactly the same as it would from a presidency, except you have a larger number of spaces you can take. Conquest can be used to take the last region away from a presidency, and then if at the end of the turn they don't have a region under them, open to them, they will be destroyed. I think it's at the end of the turn. Invest is an action trying to improve the economic status. For every pound you allocate, you increase the strength by 1. There are no penalties. If you're successful, you flip it to its prosperous side, keeping the discs in their relative position. Now, one more effect takes place, which is the elephant moves to that region. This is a big deal because the elephant is where the random events happen. So you might be able to control the random events somewhat by doing this kind of action. I need to break here because my battery's running low, and unfortunately that one was green for a while and now it's red again, so I don't know how charged it is. Not fully, but the last of the offices to operate in the company phase is the superintendent of trade in China, who can do one thing, the trade functionality. Now, he doesn't exist at the beginning of the game. He can be given ships, but not goods, apparently. Yeah, just ships. And he can trade in these 3 commodities at their prices, just as if it's on one of these cards. He doesn't have to worry about financial conditions. All right, then we go to the trade phase. At this point, you get some player revenue. Money equal to the tax value of regions controlled by a provincial office. So the governor, well, let's go back to our governor of Bengal, assuming he still exists. He would have to exist. He can take the tax value. That money goes here, or he can just take it in his pocket. Or he can take some of it into his pocket. Only the current turn's tax revenue can be used, though. He can't steal if there's money left over from previously. Each president gets money equal to the total number of black dots fulfilled orders that are there. That happens before events. Cool. Okay. Each ship that has a captain, the family who has that captain gets £2. Also, there are some special things, the investment bank and South Sea firm. Now, I think the South Sea firm works at a different moment. One of them works at a different moment. I don't know whether to use the rule book or the card here if they're in conflict. But basically, you make some money here, and the Sykes and Paxton family get their cash here. So this guy, if he has 2 writers, he gets £1 from the bank. The Paxtons, every 2 ships with captains, he gets £1 from the bank. Or £1 for the bank from every firm. I'm not sure if that's per ship for every firm or if he just gets money from every firm or for every firm. We'll worry about that if that happens. That only happens if the monopoly fails. Okay. The next thing is the company has to pay out its money. It has to pay the following expenses. £1 for each black disc in the court of directors for the loans it's taken. £1 for each gun and office in one of the presidencies. And £1 for each captain on a ship. That's taken off the company revenue. After that's done, it's time to pay dividends. Now, those other expenses can cause emergency loans, where additional £5 debts are added to the pile in order to be able to make sure that the company revenue is up to snuff. It cannot be spent for dividends, however. You can't take loans for dividends. What do you think? I'm not sure. Yeah. And indeed, the way this is worded, emergency loans have to be, if there's additional money left after an emergency loan, it has to be assigned to the offices. So I don't think if you go into emergency loans, you're allowed to pay dividends. All right. If the company share price is at £3, dividends are demanded. And if there is sufficient revenue, you must pay at least £1 per share that's in there. If you can't do it, then you don't do it, and there will be a bailout. After paying expenses, the remainder of the revenue must be allocated. It can be sent to company offices or paid out as dividends. When sending it to offices, the money goes directly on the holdings with the treasury symbol, these guys. And you keep dropping until you get to 0. If you choose to pay dividends, you have to pay £1 to each player that's got a cube in here. And I don't know how this has worked out, but minimum firm payout. This is for none of that has to do with the company. Okay. Yeah, you pay £1 per cube that's in there for each level of dividend. If you pay one level of dividend, the share price will not move. If you pay 2 or more sets of dividends, you shift it one to the right. We have not hit the bailout here. Let's see what rule that is. J3. Let's jump over to there. A bailout happens when the share price would fall below 3. First, all the shares get reduced. If a player only has 1 cube in the court of directors, they get it returned to them. If they have more than 1 cube, they get all but 1 returned to them. Then the share price will be 3, and each executive office holder must vacate, but they'll be allowed to score a prize. It just costs them £2 more from their family income. If there are no cubes left after a bailout in here, i.e. nobody had more than 1, then the game will be over and everyone in an executive office will lose 3 victory points. Now, after deregulation, after the monopoly fails, bailouts don't cause any loss of shares. And if the company's lost its monopoly and there's at least 1 firm at the end of the game turn, the game will continue 1 more game turn, but we'll skip the company phase. I don't know how that's possible because the shares won't be eliminated. And this is really one of the few, I mean, I guess it's possible if nobody had any shares in there. but that's really an unlikely circumstance. So that rule looks like it's problematic. If the company has lost its monopoly and there is at least one firm at the end of the game turn. If the company, I guess this just replaces the regular company failure. If the company's lost its monopoly and there's at least one firm, the game will continue one more game turn, but will skip the company phase, regardless of how many shares there are. All right. Right then. And the battery's dead again, or dying again. Let's see if we can handle the events. Okay, the events, and we'll use this one as an example, have a number of different parts to them. First part here, this is going to be the price of goods for which there's a factory. Here, it lists a number of events that are going to happen in India. The elephant will move as many times indicated by the large number. Conquests and revolts will move the elephant strangely, but otherwise it always moves one space from where it was. So it would go from 1 to 2. And 8 goes over to 1. And each time the elephant visits a region, it'll cause an event. If you just upgraded a region, the elephant's on there, that means it's not going to hit that region for a long time, which is kind of cool. That's what I thought it was, but I wasn't positive. You roll the event dice to determine the event. Normally, you'll roll 2 event dice. If it's in order, you will take I think the lower of the 2. And if it's in chaos, you take the highest of the 2 dice. If it's in equilibrium, you only roll 1 die, and you just take it. Now, different territories react differently to order and chaos. So, prosperous areas that are I don't know how to word this. So I think we'll not try to say that. Let's take a look at a not prosperous area. So sunburst is collapse. That's not good. Yeah. So high rolls can cause revolts in areas that are subjugated. Areas that are empires, well, low rolls will cause them to flip over and be better. Collapse, the high rolls, cause problems with the trade in the area. But when they're rich, low rolls make them more militant, and they may be causing problems for other territories. On the other hand, some of them have X's, they're less military, and they're willing to accept the status quo on low rolls. I think it's that some of these areas are really violent, and they just have different reactions to whether or not it's chaos. Okay. Whenever a region becomes closed, any orders on it will become disrupted. The president, associated with the order, removes as many ships as the demand of each filled order from either the presidency's holding or those ships that it has exhausted and returns them to the stock. Ships without captains have to be removed before those with captains. If there's a conquest, it'll attempt to conquest the target region, which will be worded on the thing. So, for example, this will be conquesting Madras, Hyderabad, Bombay. And it'll have a strength for the attack. And there's a little arrow So if I rolled Bombay and Bombay was already conquered, I could go to Hyderabad instead, or to Madras. But if I roll Madras, I can't go back because the arrow goes in the wrong direction. If those regions are all dominated militarily by someone, it's going to be a status quo event. They won't try to conquer a region that's owned by someone else. You compare the strength to the target's defense, and if the conquest strength is greater, it now dominates the target region. If you conquer the sovereign of an empire, you take it all over. No, sorry. All those subordinate regions become sovereign and closed. When a conquest is successful and if further events remain to be resolved, the elephant will next move to the lowest numbered sovereign region, not including this region. So it stops following the numbers. It jumps back as low as it can to a sovereign. Regions within a presidency, if attacked, the president is allowed to allocate unexhausted guns or officers, i.e. if he did a conquest, he doesn't get to use them, in order to boost the region's defense. Each gun or officer adds one to the defense. The president can also hire mercenaries. And remember, this happens after money's been paid out, so you might have more money. If it's a region dominated by the company, it no longer has its written defense value. Only the provincial office can allocate unexhausted guns and officers. If the region is conquered, you put a black disc on the provincial officer's current office holder, and that office will be eliminated at the end of attrition. If a presidency's last region becomes closed, and this is for any reason that's covered elsewhere, you put a black disc on the presidency's current office holder, and that office will be eliminated at the end of attrition. If 7 or more regions are now closed, the game may end. You could end up flipping a card over either to depressed or prosperous. If it flips, I'm missing something here. I don't think conquest causes chaos. I don't see that. But flipping a unit to depressed tilts it towards chaos, tilts the balance towards chaos. Flipping it towards prosperous, it tilts it towards order. If there's a revolt, a region becomes sovereign and closed. Any completed orders are disrupted. If a region is dominated by the company revolts, you put a black disc on the provincial officer, and that office will be eliminated. If the presidency loses his last region, the presidency will be eliminated. The balance of India goes towards chaos. And if further events remain to be resolved, the elephant moves to the lowest numbered dominated region. I don't know if that counts dominated by an empire. Okay, revolts can be canceled by company-dominated regions if the provincial office can equal the result of the event die roll that triggered the revolt with the strength of its police. The police starts at 0, and each gun and officer it exhausts, and each 2 pounds it spends. I think that's some, not gun or officer plus 2 pounds. Will the strength of its police? Yeah. So if they match the event die roll with that total, they can cancel it out. And then the balance does not tilt towards chaos. Collapse, all completed orders are disrupted. The balance tilts towards chaos. Status quo, the balance tilts towards order. And we have to pause here because I'm getting flickering battery that's like, it's dead. Now, after resolving this part of the event card, we go down to the attrition phase. In the attrition phase, you roll a die for each office holder in order. First, the chairman. On a 4 or more, the chairman is retired. Executive officers 5 or more, senior officers 6. Some people will be forced to roll a 6 if they have a black disc on them. After these have all been rolled, each vacating cube can score a prize or return it to the owner's stock. Prizes start following the blue ribbon from the chairman. And you pay the cost you want for the prize, and you put your cube from the vacated office onto the prize card. Remember, this is pretty much the only way you get victory points in the game. You can put cubes into these to score some victory points. But the main way you get victory points is by being booted out of office. And this is kind of a random thing. The chairmanship is very likely to be able to claim a prize, though. At least within a couple turns. Some of the prizes have a power, you can use it. If you have a black disc, you automatically roll a 6, you'll have to leave, but you can pay £2 more than the normal cost to score your prize. Now we go to the local news, which will either have an event that takes place or a law. If there's a proposed law, which is 13 of the cards, 6 of them have an event on them, there's only 10 turns, there's 19 cards. This gets placed on a starting place for the particular vote. They all have different starting places. They're not always at 0. In order for the law to pass, it has to end up above 0. Now, starting with the chairman, each player is allowed to vote the number of shipyards plus the number of factories plus the number of pounds that they want to spend. However, you can't go above 10 or below -10, which means it might be possible for someone to drop a big amount of money and votes at the end of the cycle and just swing the vote completely. I believe you're not allowed to spend more than $10, but I don't know where I'm remembering that. I thought I saw that somewhere. I do not see it here, so maybe I'm wrong. Okay, now you refresh the board. Any black discs come away from the completed orders. Exhausted ships go back to their presidency. Or firm if we're playing with deregulation. Exhausted goods go back to the stock. Goods are one use. Ships get to be used again and again, assuming there's not a disruption in trade. Any ship with a captain is given to the player owning the captain. No, wrong place. Cubes in the captain research box move to the director of trade. Ships in the military officers move to the military affairs. And this is why those boxes don't help you at the beginning of the game right away, because they haven't refreshed. The goods and ships are refilled so that you can buy more. I think there's an absolute limit on these, but I'm not positive. The game turn marker moves forward. Okay. Likely, the deregulation event will happen on turns 4, 5, or 6. Now, I've changed the game. I'm not using the monopoly revoked. I'm using the law which allows the monopoly to be revoked. This is not really a scenario, but I like it a little better than forcing the monopoly to be revoked. But let's talk about what would happen under deregulation. About half the game changes. That's what I'm told. Basically, a whole series of rules change. Bailouts, okay. You can't open trade. Captains are given to the player owning the captain. Ship ownership will be the ship's position in front of its owner. Interlopers, the $2 for having ship owners within the company. And country trade. What the fuck's country trade? The money that you get for being a captain. What are interlopers then? Oh, the upkeep for country trade. So the company is no longer going to be subsidizing captains in the way that they did. All right. So, in the family action phase, you're allowed to take as many as you like. Play begins with the chairman and proceeds clockwise. You can take one single family action, but you can continue to take them over multiple rounds until all players have passed. There are new family actions: buy ships or goods, establish a firm, trade mission, and pass. You can only take ones that have no cost, trade mission, pass, rider, and officer, once per game turn. Other ones you can do multiple times, so you can buy up manors and get lots of victory points. It's expensive, though. I mean, £5 is not cheap. All right. Buy ships or goods. When you take this, you can purchase one or two ships or goods. You may not purchase one of each. 2 or 3 players, you're allowed to buy more. Ships and goods follow the same procedure, except you don't have to buy the cheapest one, and you get the ships or the goods. You can establish a firm. If you don't own a firm, you can pay $3 to flip over your family card. Once your family becomes a firm, any ships or goods belonging to that family will be considered property of the firm. Firms have the ability to trade mission action and to set sail and resolve trade mission when they pass. Trade mission. This is only allowed by firms. You place any number of ships on a sovereign closed region. For each ship sent on a trade mission, the owning firm must place a single cube on top of the ship to indicate ownership. You may not do this on the last game turn. When you pass, you're allowed to immediately set sail and resolve trade missions. If you're a firm, you can do the set sail action. You follow the same structure as the company action, but your action penalty is determined by the number of open regions that the firm wishes to sail to -1. Completed orders are indicated by placing a cube from the firm owner's stock on the demand circle, and any exhausted goods and ships should be placed above the player's firm card. All revenue from orders are placed on the firm card. Okay. So, if you succeed in completing the order, you put your cube on the demand circle instead of a black circle, and you fill it up that way. And any exhausted goods and ships that you use are shifted above your card to indicate that they're tired. And you get the cash in your firm treasury. Oh boy. My battery charger is acting up and not charging and looking like it's complete when it's not. Okay. Now, resolving trade missions. For every region where the player's firm has at least one ship on a trade mission, you can make a check with the total number of ships on the trade mission, including other players' ships, as the strength. There's no penalty. If it's successful, you add the region to one of the available presidencies of the company. Any dominions remain attached to their sovereigns. And this can really bone the poor company. Remember, it doesn't hurt the players because they can react where they want, but it can bone company presidencies pretty badly and make it hard for them to do any shipping. Each ship on the region earns money from the bank equal to the plunder of the region given to the firm that owns the ship. Then those ships get returned to the owner, and cubes indicating ownership are returned to the stock. Now, remember, you have to have the cubes to put on your ships if firms are in play, which may mean pulling things off prizes. So there's a lot of weird shit going on here, and this is why I say there's a lot of obscurantism in this game. Some of it may be just balancing things out, but it's hard to tell what you want to do. Buying ships might not be your best move because of this. If the check was a failure, though, all the ships in the region are lost and returned to the stock. Now, the firms work kind of like corporations in an XX game. They have their own treasury separate from the family treasury, and a player can transfer funds from their family to the family's firm at any time, but not the other way back. Ships or goods belonging to a player owning a firm are owned by the firm. The firm's treasury can only be spent to set sail, buy ships and goods, and pay dividends. Okay. You can offer a portion of your firm's revenue in 10% increments to other players at the table and accept or reject bids for that share. Once accepted, the bidding player places cubes on the appropriate space on the firm card. Hopefully you only need 1 cube per company that you invest in. Potential investors may offer any combination of goods, ships, or money to the firm, as well as money or promises to its owner. Now, promises are kind of interesting because I don't know if there's a good place to put them anymore. They're on the other side of the card, and players can exchange these revenue shares and buy and sell them at any time. Seeking investors can lead to transfer of the ownership. At any time, hostile takeovers. At any time, if another player ever gets the largest share of a firm's revenue, that player may initiate a hostile takeover. The firm's treasury, ships, and goods are transferred to the new player, and the previous owner places a cube representing their share of the company's revenue on the new owner's firm card. If the new owner's family card has not yet flipped, flip it to the firm side, and the former owner's firm card should revert to the family side. If the new owner already has a firm, the only way this can be done is through a merger. At any time, players can consolidate any number of firms through a negotiated merger. A negotiated merger creates a single firm, and the total ownership has to be 100%. Any other firms involved in the merger must transfer their treasuries and any of their ships and goods to the remaining firm and then revert to their family side. During the merger, a shareholder's stake can be lowered with their consent. If there's a tie among shareholders to determine who is the owner, all the tied players must agree who will own the firm. If there's any disagreement on the terms of the merger, it will not occur. So if you and I both have a company and we think that we can make more money by combining them somehow, we could each say, I could say, well, I'll give you control of the company, but you give me a 50% share. But maybe I have more ships than you do, so maybe I say, I'll take it and I only give you 40%. Okay, but maybe somebody else has 10% of my company, and then I can give you your 40%, but I have to leave that 10% on there that somebody else had unless I can convince them to get rid of it, which maybe I can pay them for or something. All kinds of different opportunities arise from here. Payouts and public expectations. That's where this card comes from. At the start of the trade phase, each firm must pay out a portion of its treasury to its owners. It must match or exceed public expectations determined by the number of open regions. So it's got a minimum payout. And this, unfortunately, is not here. Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. It's got a minimum payout based on the number of open regions that are running. Shares are paid out according to the payout chart listed on the board, which rounds up any fraction of 3/4 or more to the nearest whole number. The firm's owner takes whatever remains after paying their shareholders. If they cannot make the minimum payment, the firm fails. It pays out its entire treasury, and the firm card becomes a family side card. All ships and goods are returned to the stock. You can always shift money, except on the last turn, from your family to any firms to make the firm able to keep it up to public expectations. All right. On the final game turn, a firm can pay £3 plus a sale action penalty. 7. I think we know what this is. It's the extra, the number of open regions. I'm not quite sure what this means. Oh, boy. Where did that go? On the final game turn, any firm can pay £3 plus the sale action penalty for an automatic success on their sale action. Okay. If that sale action revenue matches or exceeds public expectation, all revenue from the firm's last sale action is paid in victory points and split among the shareholders. No additional money from a private firm may be paid out on the last game turn. Money's not necessarily terribly useful. But this allows you to give victory points on the last turn in a way that doesn't require buying prizes or banners or whatever. All right, the game ends on the end of the 10th turn for mine. Players complete their attrition rolls, and then the game is over. The player with the most victory points wins the game. If there's a tie, the player with the most prize cubes wins. If there's a further tie, the player with the most money wins. The time we played, it went down to most money, and it was real close. It was a buck apart. The game can also end in company failure or mutiny. Mutiny is something we discussed very early if too many areas are closed. You can take penalties for promises, but of course you could buy them off or maybe exchange them or something. Bailout and company failures. A bailout, we talked about that. The mutiny we talked about. The scenarios, very briefly. Okay, so the basic scenario is the early company game. That's 6 turns, no chance of Monopoly being revoked. That's what I played before. The campaign game has this card in the middle of the 10-card deck. It's not clear as how many cards should be in the deck. I'm using all the cards, but that doesn't appear to be correct. There's a post-Monopoly scenario which begins with the revoking of the company's monopoly, and it has some situations set up at the beginning of the game, and the monopoly is assumed revoked with the company in kind of trouble. This is, I think, the mid-game scenario, company under siege. And it's where we use the card that I'm using, which is to be used, and this is supposed to be the most complicated of the scenarios, which is to be used with, and it doesn't say how long it is. I assume 6 turns, but who knows? Maybe only the campaign scenario is supposed to be 10 turns. Anyway. Each player starts with, so there's some laws in place. And the biggie here is every time there's a bailout, the monopoly may be revoked by vote. I like that, but I don't want that to happen until, say, after turn 6, or whatever. So I've got the revoke by vote in there. I've got this in here as well, which is a revoke that the players don't control. If there's a reshuffle, that'll end up in the deck. The final scenario uses a different map, and maybe we'll play it, maybe not. It is playing John Company without the John Company. No East India Company at all. You just are dealing with your shipping and your family income. Looks like an interesting idea. Supposedly it's the least, it's not fully play tested, but it looks like it should work as well as any of these, right? I mean, there's a real, I don't know how much of a sandbox to call this because the actions are obscure or obscured. They're not clearly things like, yes, and I will promote my own person, So like the nepotism rule and stuff like that. To me, those kind of things make it not so clear how you want to move forward. You're not just promoting your own people. It's not like a game of Junta or Kremlin, where it's very clear what you want to do to some extent. It may not be clear how to play the other players, but how to play the mechanism of the game is very clear. This reminds me more of Geronimo, where you may want to do some weird things that are very gamey. And I feel like a lot of modern games are working towards this kind of obscurantism, where the effects of your actions aren't inherently obvious, nor are they intuitive. And that kind of thing troubles me. It feels like some of the... something has to be hidden in a game. It could be the cards that you hold in a game of poker so you can bluff. It could be the strategy that you have. It could be your negotiations and how well you're going to interact, how other people are going to operate, etc. Something has to be hidden to make a game interesting. This game is interesting to me and intriguing in certain ways, but I fear that the hidden thing is how to make the mechanisms work to your best advantage. How to get the trick out of them. Not sort of pulling a rule out of your ass like, say, SFB or ASL can be, where, you're just really trying to use the rules to their best advantage, but rather using the mechanisms in ways that, figuring out how to use these mechanisms rather than remembering a rule and being able to outguess an opponent or do something that they didn't expect because of that. Rather, you're doing something they didn't expect because the mechanism doesn't work how you think it would. There's no real alignment to reality over it. And that kind of worries me. I know that the Pax Porfiriana had a little bit of that problem as well. I feel like some of the earlier Sierra Madre games had a little bit of it, but not much. Largely, things worked how you would think they would, and where there was complexity and obscurantism, it was really a matter of trying to express the reality more properly. Here I feel like it's there for its own sake because it makes gameplay better, and that's it. And that worries me a little, but we'll see, because I had a lot of fun the first time I played it, although I wasn't really trying to win until the last turn of the game. And then I said, maybe if I sandbag well enough, it'll work. Well, it came close. And I had no clue who was winning. I totally didn't pay attention to victory points. So I'm not sure just what was obscured. I was so interested in the mechanisms of the game that I wasn't really interested in trying to win, or I wasn't understanding trying to win at all. Anyway, let's send this up and we'll get this started, I hope, tomorrow.